So good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining the public workshop on the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and Clean Water State Revolving Fund intended use plans. This meeting is being held virtually through Zoom and is being recorded and webcast publicly. This workshop is for informational purposes and no formal action will be taken. Today, we are hosting this meeting virtually from the traditional territory and homelands of the Maidu, Miwok, and Nisenan people in the modern city of Sacramento. We know that they are still actively working to stabilize their livelihoods and preserve their way of life. We equally honor the groups who have experienced economic, environmental, and social disadvantages as a result of historical marginalization, and we recognize that we are meeting during a very challenging time. We recognize the impact this global pandemic has had and will have on marginalized communities and all communities across California. Our work here today supports Indigenous and community voices as we work together to provide clean, safe, affordable water to all Californians. Next slide, please. Okay, so today we have about 73 people participating with us on the Zoom platform or by phone. And some things to note are that the Water Boards does not have a chat function as a part of the Zoom platform. And if our presentation is too big to fit your screen, please set your view to fit screen. And for security purposes, all participants have their microphone and video turned off and will not have control over these features unless we invite you to share your audio. We will not be showing participant videos today. And typically, a taskbar is found at the bottom of your Zoom window, but can also be found on the left side. And there's usually about a 30 to 60 second lag between the Zoom meeting and the webcast. And also to improve streaming quality for folks, most presenters today will not be sharing their video. So we want to thank each of you for finding a way to join us virtually. We thank you for your patience and understanding as we move to a 100% virtual meeting space so that we can adapt to the current public health concerns. And we are doing our best to make sure that everyone can participate in an effective way that is valuable for everyone. And so some guidelines for a meeting are, in case we or you get disconnected from the video, please rejoin the Zoom meeting or watch the webcast on the Cali PA website. Take breaks as you need them. This will be a 3-hour workshop and we will take a break about halfway through, but we encourage everyone to take care of themselves. Folks participating on the call, as mentioned, will have their microphones muted and cameras turned off during the presentation portions, but there will be an opportunity to ask questions and provide comments after the presentation. And at that time, if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand through the participants window. Questions will be taken in the order they were received, and when it's your turn, your name will be announced. You will be asked to turn on your microphone. And we ask you to be sure that your name on Zoom matches your real name. And for those watching at home or calling in without the Zoom application, if you have any questions or comments, you can email them using the subject line as 2020-21 IUP workshop. And email your questions or comments to drinkingwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov if they're related to the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund IUP, or email cleanwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov if they pertain to the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And so today we have staff from the Division of Financial Assistance presenting today, who will be introduced in a moment. We also have many staff working behind the scenes to make sure that we have as few participation bumps as possible. And they are here to support the process at all its levels. Those staff include Alyssa, Melky, Maria, Saressa, Tatiana, and Moises. Tatiana and Moises will also be facilitating the question and comment portion of today's workshop. And now I'd like to introduce Christopher Stevens. Christopher Stevens is the Loan and Grant Assistant Deputy Director in the State Water Board's Division of Financial Assistance. Christopher oversees both the Drinking Water SRF and Clean Water SRF programs. Christopher, the microphone is yours.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you, gentlemen. My name is Christopher Stevens, Assistant Deputy Director here at Division of Financial Assistance. And so welcome, everyone. We're so glad you can join us today for our workshop on the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plans. Hope everyone is safe and doing well, and more importantly, adjusting to the current circumstances. As you all have probably experienced, I'm guessing, a lot of adjustments, and the same here for us. Significant adjustments and changes over the last couple of months. We've done IUP workshops for the last several years. This is the first time we're doing it remote, as Jenilyn has talked about. You know, we ask for your patience and understanding as we learn how to do this in a new way. But I think the flip side of that is, you know, this creates some opportunities that that are new and hopefully beneficial. Hopefully there's some new folks participating today that maybe didn't in the past because of the cost and the time associated with getting on an airplane. We have webcasted the workshops in the past, so that's familiar to us. But now participating here remotely, that will be something new. And hopefully there's some new folks there that have an opportunity to do that that maybe didn't in the past. So we have quite a bit that's in common with our past workshops. The main difference being here, we'll do them similar to as we've done them in the past. We'll have a short presentation to highlight the key points in the IUPs themselves. In a physical setting, you know, it's very easy to kind of gauge the audience reaction, and we've typically been pretty flexible there, and people could interrupt us during the presentation with questions. So that's the main difference here, is that we're going to do the presentations, and then we will have a question and discussion period after that. As we've done in the past, we will do a presentation on the Drinking Water SRF IUP first, then we'll have some questions and discussions afterwards. If there's time, we'll take a break, and then we will come back and we will do the presentation on the Clean Water SRF IUP, followed by more questions and discussions. And just to repeat, Jenilyn mentioned the emails there for the folks that are participating or just watching on the webcast, or anybody. You can send in questions via email at any time. If you have questions on the Drinking Water IUP, send them to drinkingwatersrf as one word at waterboards.ca.gov. And for the Clean Water SRF, very similar, Clean Water SRF as one word at waterboards.ca.gov. So Melky, if you could bring up the next slide, please. I'm going to introduce the first presenters here on the Drinking Water. There's me, for those of you that don't know me. And so we've got two presenters today. They're going to tag team here on the presentation. First is going to be Wen-Trin Lei, one of the senior engineers in the Drinking Water SRF program. And also working with her will be Bridget Chase, who's one of our supervising engineers in the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wen.
Thank you, Christopher. Good morning. Welcome everyone to the workshop. Thank you for taking the time to join us today to discuss the draft state fiscal year 2020-2021 Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan. My name is Wen-Trin Lei, and I am the Senior Engineer, Chief of the Drinking Water SRF Technical Unit. Today, I will go over some key elements of the Drinking Water SRF IUP and highlight what's new for this year. We will then open for questions and comments after the presentation, just like Christopher had mentioned. So here is a preview of the topics that I will cover today. I will go over some of the backgrounds and IUP basics. I will also briefly discuss the program financial outlook and the development of the comprehensive list and the fundable list for this year. As you know, the Drinking Water SRF has been around for some time, and many of you are probably familiar with the intended use plan that the State Water Board Division of Financial Assistance has presented over the years. Many are the same this year, but there are a few exciting news. One significant thing is the additional supplemental appropriations for Disaster Relief Act 2019, or ASADRA, and I will go over that in more detail later on. Also, we'll have Bridget Chase from the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions to present information related to the funding for small DACs and small SDACs. I will then finish up with the schedule for adopting the IUP and how your comments could be submitted to us. Next slide, please. So you already know the Drinking Water SRF were established in 1996 by the Safe Drinking Water Act Amendment to provide low-interest loans and some principal forgiveness to public water systems for drinking water system improvements. Congress would appropriate funds to US EPA, and US EPA would then allocate funds to states based on the needs for each state. So the state needs are documented in the Drinking Water Infrastructure Needs Survey and Assessment that is conducted every 4 years. The survey assessment is anticipated to start in July this year. However, that will be before all of the COVID-19 happening. So now there are certain delays and we are waiting for further direction from US EPA. We will be contacting the large water system that are selected for the survey for assistance in gathering documentation for the survey once we get the green light to start from US EPA. And I want to thank you all of the large system that has been helping us with this effort, and we are looking forward to another successful round this year. And so that's just a little sign off on how the state of California has been getting the largest capitalization grant for the drinking water SRF. However, the need for California is many times over the federal grants that we receive. And California, the state, has several other funding sources to complement the drinking water SRF. The drinking water SRF policy and the IUP are applicable for these complementary funding sources as well. Also, in July 2019, Senate Bill 200 established the Safer Drinking Water Program. The Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Funds is one of the tools that the State Water Board has to complement the State Water Board's existing suite of financial assistance programs. The Drinking Water SRF program focuses on 3 areas, and therefore the projects that applied for funding are prioritized accordingly to address most serious public health problems, to assist most in need on per household affordability basis, and to ensure compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act requirements. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to touch on some of the IUP basics. You can see we have the draft IUP posted on either the board comment page, which has a link to the program page, or you can go directly to the program, the Drinking Water SRF program page to view the IUP. The State Water Board will submit this IUP as part of its application for the federal fiscal year 2020 capitalization grant from the EPA. And the IUP contains elements required under the federal law. One of the requirements is to establish the State Water Board business plan for the drinking water SRF and its associated state funding program. And the annual business plan includes the discussion on finances, staffing, resources, goal, approach, and requirements. And we will go over some key aspects later. Next slide, please. So who are the eligible applicants? This has been remained the same. Any publicly owned community water systems, any privately owned community water system, and any non-profit, non-community water system, provided that they can meet all other drinking water SF requirements. And the eligibility may depend on the applicant type and funding source. For the funding, the eligible costs, these costs include planning documents, project design, construction and construction management, administration, and of course the cost for preparing environmental documents. Next slide, please. For the financial outlook, one of the elements that require is that the DFA analyze the funding data and projection, and we have determined that the sustainable funding capacity for the drinking water SRF is approximately $300 million in loan per year. In addition, there will be approximately $47.5 million in principal forgiveness available for the federal fiscal year 2020. Furthermore, the complementary funds available will be around $202.3 million from a combination of Proposition 1 and Proposition 68. There are also roughly $160 million from Proposition 1 groundwater that remain, and of these, $110 million is reserved for DAP and STAX projects. Next slide, please. Oh, the final solicitation for 2020 is planned to start later this year. So now I want to point out that only DAC or STAC drinking water projects that include treatment for groundwater. Melky, can we go back to the previous slide, please? Yeah, I just want to stress that the projects that include treatment of groundwater source for direct potable use are eligible for this grant, Prop 1 groundwater grant. And unlike drinking water SRF, this groundwater grant is available for to benefit DAC and STAC of any size. It's not including, not limiting to just small. Right, next slide, please. So for the recent drinking water SRF and complementary financing, in the last few years activity, as you can see, the number of agreements executed were drastically lower in the state fiscal year 2018-19. And can anyone guess why? Well, if you thinking of fiscal, you are correct. It's just a fact that the transition into the new financial information system for California has been rather challenging for everyone involved. But you can see that as of March 1st, 2020, the number of agreements that was executed by DFA has increased. We have 33 funding agreements executed. But the last 4 months of this fiscal year could be even more challenging with the situation we are in now. But I think the state Division of Financial Assistance has making pretty good progress in transition into remote working, and everybody are doing their best to keep things running as smoothly as possible. Next slide, please. So as of February 2020, the comprehensive list has a total of 314 applications for almost $3 billion in requested financing. And of these, 230 projects are from small DAC and small SDAC for $460 million. There are 27 rollover projects from prior year for $1.15 billion, and 52 projects for about $1.35 billion were reviewed and ranked for placement on the fundable list this year. And next slide, please. So the fundable list is the list of projects that DFA identifies as most ready for financing by June 30th, 2021. To increase loan demand and maximize financing capacity for the drinking water SRF program, the deputy may add loan projects that are ready for financing to the fundable list, but also could buy back projects not making sufficient progress towards an agreement. And a priority is always given to small DACs and SDACs that need the drinking water SRF loan and are ready for an agreement. Loan funds would always be available to make it happen. Next slide, please. This is a summary of the fundable list for the non-small DAC, non-small SDAC. You can see that the current list has 39 projects with an estimated requested loan financing of $2.2 billion. And almost all of these requested funding is for larger water system construction projects. There's also a $65 million grant estimated funding here for specific projects, and this amount is separate from the complementary funds that I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So what is the same this year? We have match financing available. If you are interested in local match financing, please contact us. The application process is the same with application accepted continuously via SAF, an online financing application acceptance submittal tool, and DFA will assist and review as applications are submitted. It's important to repeat that project on fundable list is not a guarantee of funding, and project must meet all eligibility criteria for funding at the time of funding execution. And we have, again, all small DAC and small SDAC projects are automatically added to the fundable list. Other projects not making progress on the fundable list may be bypassed. Retroactive planning and design eligibility is the same. Past project planning and design costs are eligible, and on costs must still be documented for reimbursement. Next slide, please. So what else is same? DFA offer extended planning financing term. The applicant could choose either 5-year or 10-year term. Extended construction financing is available at 40 years for DAC and SDAC or the useful life of the project. And for all other systems, the term is 30 years or project useful life. The loan repayment is annual, with the first principal and interest repayment due after After project completion would be like it's due 12 months for non-DAC and SDAC, and due 18 months later for DAC and SDAC. Also, the prepayment will require DFA Deputy Director approval. And next slide, please. So here come the somewhat exciting part of what new with this year. The drinking water SF policy was last amended on December 3rd, 2019. And the major change was to streamline the final approval process, and project will be finalized from the outset in the agreement. This will eliminate the mandatory amendment steps that are associated with the final budget approval and allow recipients to draw construction funds sooner. This will also help minimize the volume of agreement amendments DFA has to do, and will allow us to be able to focus more on executing new funding agreements. But the agreement may still be amended for cost increases and for all 4 other changes. Besides that, there are changes in grant funding criteria that Bridget will go over in detail next when she covers the funding aspect for small DAC and small SDAC. I will then discuss the detail in the additional supplemental appropriation for Disaster Relief Act 2019 and wrap up the presentation for drinking water SRF. I will now turn it over to Bridget, who will be talking about the small DAC and small SDAC. Bridget, please take it over.
Thank you, Wynn. My name is Bridget Chase, and I'm a supervising engineer in the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions. So my slides are going to go over small community funding information available through the Drinking Water SRF IUP. So before I go over the funding information, I would like to go over some definitions that will be used in the upcoming slides. So for drinking water projects, a small community is considered a community of 10,000 or less people, or 3,300 connections or less. We further define an expanded small community as a community between 10 and 20,000 people, or 3,300 connections to 6,600 connections. A community is considered disadvantaged if their median household income, or MHI, is less than or equal to 80% of the statewide MHI. And a community with an MHI of less than or equal 60% of the statewide MHI is considered a severely disadvantaged community, and we refer to that further on as SDAC as well. You may have noticed that small DACs are not listed on the fundable list, as Wynn said. This is because small DACs are automatically added to our fundable list no matter when they submit their application. Small DAC applications do not need to be ranked or scored to be added to this list. However, the current demand for grant and principal forgiveness funding exceeds the available funding, and for this reason, we are planning to prioritize projects that address the most serious human health risks, or category A through C projects, and other consolidation projects. We offer technical assistance to small water systems to help with such things as application assistance, public outreach, rate studies, and sometimes we even offer planning necessary to apply for construction funding. Small disadvantaged communities that still need to complete the necessary planning to move forward with a selected construction project, such as a feasibility report and environmental documents, can apply for planning funding. Planning projects may be eligible for up to $500,000 in grant or principal forgiveness. And we also offer 0% loans for 5 to 10 years for the amount that's above that. This information can be found in Appendix D of the draft IUP. So the next 2 slides include grant eligibility for construction projects. This information can be found in Appendix E of the IUPs. As I mentioned a couple of slides back, we are prioritizing projects that address the most serious human health risks. So category A through C projects. This particular slide is going to go over those A through C projects. The higher priority projects may receive up to $60,000 per connection for grant. This table shows the percentage of project costs that may be eligible for grant or principal forgiveness based on the type of community. As you can see, small DACs, small SDACs, and eligible non-transient non-communities such as public schools may receive up to 100% grant for their project. We are also proposing to open up grant funding to small disadvantaged water systems for these types of projects, allowing them to qualify for up to 50% grant. And I think I said small disadvantaged, I meant small non-disadvantaged. So this slide goes over eligibility for category D through F projects. Again, priority for these projects will be given to consolidation projects. These projects are eligible for up to $45,000 per connection. Similar to the previous slide, small severely disadvantaged communities are eligible for a higher grant percentage than expanded small water systems. For most of these systems, we will be also looking at the residential water rates as a percentage of communities MHI to determine the system is grant eligible or not. Small non-DACs are not eligible for their category D through F projects for principal forgiveness or grant. So if you've followed the IUP for DACs the last few years, you may have noticed there are some fairly substantial changes to the funding that is available. We have removed the maximum grant per project that was previously $5 million, and rather we are focusing on the cost per connection. We are also including all grant funding in a 5-year period in that calculation, so the cap includes any technical assistance funding, planning grants, and construction grants. I was pointed out this morning that that's not clear in the IUP, so we are proposing to include that in a change sheet. So that cap does include all costs for the project. Because our focus and priority is on the projects that address the more serious health risks, we have included a higher cap per connection for the category A through C projects. We also looked at projects for smaller water systems that have fewer than 45 connections and are proposing that our Deputy Director can approve construction projects up to $2 million regardless of the cost per connection. We have also opened up grant funding for some small non-DACs, as I pointed out 2 slides back, and expanded small DACs. We plan to continue to incentivize consolidation projects by offering 0% loans up to $10 million for a construction project that solely benefits a receiving public water system when the system fully consolidates one or more small water systems or extends service to one or more communities. To further incentivize consolidations, we are proposing to offer grant or principal forgiveness to the receiving water system of up to $5,000 per connection when they are consolidating a small DAC, and up to $10,000 per connection when they're consolidating a severely disadvantaged community water system, for a max of $5 million. And that would be for a project that's separate than the consolidation project. It would be for something that is proposed for the system that's taking them on. That is the last of my slides, so I'm going to pass it back to Wynn, and I will be available for questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. So I will continue to discuss the second portion of the drinking water SRF IUP. So this year, as I mentioned earlier, the State Water Board is also submitting a supplemental IUP to apply for additional supplemental appropriations for Disaster Relief Act 2019, or ASADRA. And the ASADRA became law on June 6th of 2019. This provides additional funding for water and wastewater infrastructure affected by specific natural disasters. So for California, it is for wildfires in the 2018 calendar year. California can apply for $41,903,000 for drinking water SRF and $183,000 for clean water SRF. Due to the extensive fire damage to public water systems in California, the State Water Board will transfer clean water SF allocation to the Drinking Water SF program. And you can find more information on the ASADRA supplemental IUP on Appendix G of the IUP that's posted on our website. Next slide, please. So for ASADRA eligible projects, please refer to the October 23rd, 2019 memo from US EPA as posted at the link shown here for additional detailed example of the type of project that would be eligible for this special funding. ASADRA funds are available to help any public water system affected by wildfire in the calendar year 2018. All existing requirements for the drinking water SF program are applicable to ASADRA projects. And there is a memorandum of understanding between FEMA and US EPA. So ASADRA funding will not affect FEMA eligibility. And the application may be submitted at any time through FAST. Applicants may apply for ASADRA funds separately or in combination with any other funds offered by DFA. So you can apply by submitting a new application, or you could use an existing drinking water SF application. Next slide. So the ASADRA preliminary fundable list currently have 44 potential projects from 17 entities for a total cost estimate of $194 million. Well, you can see, as I mentioned earlier, the State Water Board is applying for about $42 million in ASADRA funds. So this preliminary estimate was much higher than the funds that's available. However, and this list was compiled based on discussion with the State Water Board Division of Drinking Water and US EPA. So, but the project and associated costs may be modified as more information is gathered from the affected system. The DFA encouraged that all eligible systems submit full applications to the Drinking Water SF program. So the priority will be based on complete application as of September 30th, 2020. So right now, preliminary lists show there's a lot of project or demands out there, but we will focus on complete applications by September 30th to prioritize and evaluate, the funding approach here. So when we see that if the requested funding based on complete application is more than available funds, the priority will be based on whether the project is ready to start construction by December 31st, 2021. If the project is serving a small deck or small ass deck would be given higher priority. And also, if the project will be ranked based on the health-based ranking as detailed in the Drinking Water SF policy. If the requested funding is less than the available funds, DFA, of course, will expeditiously execute a funding agreement for all complete application, and we will also continue to assist others to complete the application, new or additional application would also be accepted, and funding will then be provided based on readiness until all the funds are committed. So what are the funding terms for ASADRA? We will be, for ASADRA, it will be 30% principal forgiveness and 70% of the loan at 0% interest to all of the eligible system, regardless of their size or income level. A repayment period will be similar to drinking water SIF, which is 30 years for non-DAC and 40 years for a DAC or SDAC project, or the project useful life, whichever is shorter. Funding for ASADRA, however, will be capped at $10 million per system. Partial project funding may be offered when the total requested funding exists available ASADRA funds, and the drinking water SF loan funds may be used in conjunction with ASADRA. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about some important dates here. As you know, the draft IUP will post it for 30-day public comment on May 11. The deadline to submit written comments is at noon, June 10, 2020. And the board meeting to consider adoption of the IUP is scheduled on June 15, 2020. As usual, the FA intend to execute agreements for project on the fundable list by June 30th, 2021. And we will address and incorporate public comments to the final version of the IUP for board adoption. So you can see that not much time in between, and under the current situation, and that most are working remotely, we strongly encourage you to submit comments electronically and submit early. So here are some of the information on how your comment can be submitted to us. More detail is on the notice of opportunity to comment and written comments. And by written comment, email is preferred, would be due to the board with the subject line, comment letter, June 16, 2020, board meeting, DWSRF IUP. And it should be addressed to Janine Townsend, close to the board at the address on your screen. I want to point out that if the electronic comments by email is less than 15 megabytes, you can send it directly to commentsletters@waterboards.ca.gov. However, if it is greater than 15 megabytes, you could fax it to 916-341-5620, or have drop off a hard copy, have the courier check-ins with Cal EPA Building Security. And also, you can also provide oral comments at the June 16, 2020 board meeting. And it, as we pointed out, it is very likely that the board meeting will be conducted via Zoom as well. Please check with the State Water Board and webpage for instruction. And that concludes the presentation for the Drinking Water SF IUP. Thank you for attending the workshop, and we will turn over to Jenalyn to open the Q&A session.
Thank you, Yuan, and thank you, Bridget, for your presentations. As you mentioned, we'll be transitioning to taking questions and comments from both the Zoom participants and from the Drinking Water SRF email. As a reminder to folks participating on the Zoom call, please raise your hand if you have a question or comment. This can be done by scrolling over the bottom of your screen or on the side until a taskbar appears. Then you click on Participants, And under the list of participants, there is a button titled Raise Hand. And please be sure that your Zoom name matches your real name. We will be checking and skipping over folks that could be a security threat. In terms of procedure, Moises will state participants in the queue at a time. And when it is your turn, Moises will introduce you and you will receive a request through Zoom to share your microphone. We kindly ask you to be mindful of the limited time we have here today. We have about 33 minutes for questions and comments. And after Zoom participants, we will take questions and comments from the Drinking Water SRF email. So in the event that we're unable to get to everyone on the Zoom call, please email your question or comment at drinkingwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov, and staff will respond to questions. Today we have Ewan, Bridget, and Christopher who will be responding to folks' questions. And we also have a few staff from our Office of Chief Counsel available for questions. And with that, Moises, please list off the participants.
Yes, of course. Thank you, gentlemen. First on the queue, we have David Peterson.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks for the presentation. Nice job. Dave Peterson with Las Virgenes Municipal Water District. Two questions. First, a procedural one. Based on the schedule presented, it looks like the plan is to recommend board adoption on June 16th. And I'm wondering, with the public comments due June 10th, which is only a few days beforehand, is that really adequate time to accept those comments, evaluate them, and to the extent that they have valuable suggestions, to incorporate changes into the IUP before it's recommended to your board? And it just doesn't feel like that's enough time, especially considering that you would likely have to submit a staff report to make that recommendation in advance. And so I'm really wondering and hoping to hear back on how, I guess, how can we ensure that some of the valuable comments that participants might have can actually be incorporated into the final version of the IUP?
So hi, David. This is Christopher. I'll take that question. And so not to dodge your question, but I suppose it depends on what the comments that we get from folks. And you know, as Wynn touched on, we can take comments at any point. And so I would encourage people to, especially if they're going to submit things that are substantive and that they think might require some adjustments or changes to the IEP, I would ask folks to submit those as early as they can, not wait till the deadline. But yeah, there is some risk there. You know, adequate, that's kind of a judgment. Is that time period adequate? Perhaps not, but yeah, we're trying to keep things on schedule. We do need to get, we have started the process to submit the capitalization grant applications to US EPA. So those are already in the works. And in particular, the ASADRA grant has to be awarded to the Water Board by September 30th, or else the state of California will lose those funds. So we're really trying to keep things on track. And yeah, I appreciate your comment that there is some risk there, but we are trying to keep things on schedule if we can, our typical schedule. And this is usually when we go to the board, the second June board meeting.
Thanks for that, Christopher. And then the second part of my question, if I may, I wanted to ask if you might be able to share a little more detail about the recommended sustainable financing level or funding level going forward for a long term. I think personally that's one of the most important elements of the IUP. And based on the presentation, it appears the recommendation is $308 million going forward. And I just note that that's a decrease from last year, where it was recommended at $420 million. So a decrease of about 27%. And at the same time, it appears that we are seeing a huge demand for these funds, both with a backlog of approaching $3 billion, and I think continued need for investment in drinking water systems, particularly those small and disadvantaged communities. And so I wanted to ask if you could share a little bit about what was the rationale in setting or recommending that sustainable capacity, and how does that comport with sort of the bigger picture here in terms of demand for these funds?
Sure. So a little bit behind the scenes as far as coming up with that number. So we did hire a new financial advisor, I want to say about a year and a half ago. And one of the tasks that we had in mind for them, and that we spent quite a bit of time on, was to update the financial model. And as you note, that's a very important number. We're trying to make the program sustainable in the long run. We could certainly go out and borrow a whole bunch of money today, but that wouldn't necessarily be a prudent thing to do. So we want to try to operate on a consistent basis, on an average. And so that's the target that we're shooting for. And so we worked very extensively with the financial advisor. There were a number of key staff, including myself and other staff involved in the program. We spent really, the financial advisor was in the office for an entire day, and then there was a lot of other interaction with them to develop the financial model. We worked very closely with them. As you note, it is a different number than what we had in there previously. We had a previous financial advisor that the process wasn't quite as transparent there. And so that was one of the things that we really wanted to try to do with our new financial advisor is to feel more comfortable with the process of going through that. And it is a fairly dramatic difference. And so we did ask for them to do a couple of things that would increase our confidence in that number. Like I say, we worked very closely with them, and so could see the nuts and bolts of the financial model that they put together. They also did have one of their senior quantitative bankers in New York take a look at the models to verify that that person couldn't find anything wrong with it. They also compared the results using the data and the assumptions that we gave them for this new model. They put that into a model for the Texas Water Development Board and got very similar results with that. So I don't think we're ever going to resolve the differences between the previous model that we had with our previous financial advisor and the current one, but we do feel confident that those results and the number that we have in the IUP currently is a good sound number. So we're going to go with that.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, David, for your question. We're now moving on to Mike Sargent. Mike, please let us know. You should be receiving a cue to unmute yourself.
There we go. How about now?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Thank you. How do we get a copy of this presentation?
Yes, we will post the presentation as well as the recording on the program websites, both the clean water and drinking water. And then I think staff is also going to email out a PowerPoint, the PDF of the PowerPoint presentations to date, everyone that participated. Staff can correct me if I'm wrong there.
Good, thank you. One last question or a comment. What I'm seeing from the limited funds is that really the funding is going for either through grants, especially, or for loans to disadvantaged or severely disadvantaged community. Because of those limited funds, they're taking priority, and there won't really be much left over for, say, small districts, of which I am one, and we are just barely not disadvantaged. but are definitely in need. So my guess is that we're probably not going to have any access to these funds. Yes?
I'm not, I don't think that I would necessarily agree with you, Mike. So certainly that statement would be true for the grant funds and the principal forgiveness funds. And but those communities, disadvantaged communities, they're not really there is some loan that's incorporated into those projects occasionally, but most of them can't afford loans. And so, yeah, the grant funds definitely are going to disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities. But the loan funds go to a wide variety of applicants, and really is driven by somebody's participation in the program and getting us a complete application and getting through the process. You know, there is that process that we have to go through to do our due diligence to loan funds to folks. So I don't think I would agree with you necessarily.
Okay, thank you.
We are now moving on to, thank you, Mike, for your comment. And we're now moving on to Marla. Marla, you are now unmuted if you would like to ask your question. Okay, Marla, at this moment in time, if you have pending questions, feel free to email them to the Drinking Water SRF at waterports.ca.gov. Are there any other participants that would like to ask a question? Please raise your hand. Otherwise, we're going to move on to the email portion and go over the questions and hand it over to Tatiana. So if there's anyone else, if you could please raise your hand. Right, seeing that there's none, Tatiana, can you passing it over to you?
Thank you, Moises. So now I will be looking at the Drinking Water SRF inbox. We do have a few questions. The first question is, how does the agency go about requesting reevaluations of current draft rankings A, B, and C?
Well, I'm assuming that that's for a disadvantaged community.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think I would ask if Bridget could field that one.
So I'm not entirely sure how to answer this question. If the question has to do more so with how we've categorized A through C projects that are outlined in the IEP and in the policy. I think that, so once you submit an application, you get assigned a project manager. And if you disagree with however the project is ranked, I think I would start off by reaching out to your project manager about that. And then it could definitely be elevated to their senior and so forth from there. But really the A through C is to get those projects that are not getting clean water or any water to a system. So it would be either they're out of compliance or they are out of water to qualify as those category A through C projects. But yeah, if you disagree with it, definitely reach out to your project manager.
Thank you, Bridget. The next question is, when will the additional supplemental appropriation for Disaster Relief Act funds begin being dispersed if the project is ready?
So I can try to answer the question here. The ASADRA funds, as I've mentioned, and Christopher also confirmed that we are in the process of applying to US EPA by submitting the supplemental IUP as part of the grant application. and all of that will be done. So the fund will be awarded to state by September 30th of this year. And so we, once we have access to fund, technically the funds could be used to fund for ASADRA eligible project. So I would encourage, if you are one of the public water system affected by the 2018 wildfire, you submit an application as soon as you can. If you have any question, reach out to me, and we will try to have a project manager assigned to work with you in completing your application.
Thank you, Wynn. And then the last question from this email is, so if you are on the additional supplemental appropriation for Disaster Relief Act fundable list, do we still need to submit an application for the drinking water SRF?
No, you can, so if you, like I mentioned earlier, if you could apply for ASADRA fund separately, or you could use an existing drinking water SRF application that you already have with DFA to modify, adding components or whatever that you need to do that would qualify for ASADRA funding. So you don't have to submit to two different programs. Right now, we accept the project for ASADRA fund through the drinking water SRF funding program that's available via FAST. So you will be using exactly the same application as you would be using applying for drinking water SRF.
So I think I would just add to that, Wynn mentioned during one of the slides that we're going to evaluate the applications that we get, whether that's a brand new application that's solely for ASADRA funds, or whether you're adding, requesting to add funds to an existing drinking water SRF application, or even if it's somebody that's not on the fundable list in the IUP, if somebody submits an application for those ASADRA funds, we're going to evaluate what we have at September 20th. And if the money that's requested is more than the money that we have, then we're going to rank those and work to execute agreements for those funds. If the money is less, then we're going to try to execute agreements for all of those that have requested the money, and we're going to keep looking for additional folks to take the remaining money. But we can't execute any agreements for the ASADRA funds until we receive them from US EPA. And so, as we've touched on, we're in the process of submitting the application. Generally, the awards for the capitalization grants come to us in August or September sometime. And so, of course, we've got to get them into our accounting system and get everything set up before we can actually execute agreements. So really not going to be looking at executing agreements for the ASADRA funds until after September 30th, and then actual disbursements sometime after that.
Thank you, Christopher. So moving along to additional questions emailed to the Drinking Water SRF inbox. How will the funds be available and used to respond to the COVID? For example, funds for water systems that are impacted by revenue shortfalls?
So that's an interesting question. And so the Drinking Water SRF program can only fund capital costs. We can't fund O&M costs. So there has been a lot of discussion at the federal level and the state level regarding revenue impacts associated with that. And so at this point, there isn't anything there isn't anything that's been approved to address those that I'm aware of anyway. There are some bills in Congress to deal with that. I think the recent one that was approved in the House, or at least proposed in the House, I may have the sequence wrong there, but I think there is some money in there to address people paying their utility bills. It's different on the Senate side. So like I say, at this point, I'm not aware of anything specifically that we have that's been, that, you know, would be available to the water boards to address those revenue shortfalls.
Thank you, Christopher. The next question is, could you explain the health concerns ranking for funding? And are properties with private contaminated wells eligible for funding to connect to a municipal water system?
Yes, this is Bridget. I will chime in here. So you could find out more details on the categories A through C through the drinking water SRF policy. So category A is for immediate health risks, and it's documented waterborne disease outbreaks attributed to the water system, water systems under a court order to correct Safe Drinking Water Act violations or to correct water outage problems, projects that have total coliform, maximum contaminant level violations, severe domestic water supply outages, posing an immediate threat to public health and safety, the distribution of water containing nitrates or perchlorates in excess of the MCL. Category B would be untreated or at-risk sources. So this would be surface water or groundwater under direct influence sources that are untreated, not filtered, or have other filtration treatment deficiencies that violate federal or state regulations. Non-groundwater under the influence or direct influence groundwater sources that are contaminated with fecal coliform or E. coli, and undercovered distribution reservoirs. And then category C is compliance or shortage problems. So it'd be water quality problems caused by source capacity or water delivery capability that is insufficient to meet existing demand. The distribution of water containing chemical or radiological contamination in violation of state or federal primary drinking water standards. So other than nitrate or perchlorate per category A. And then total coliform rule violations for reasons other than source contamination. So those are the A through C. As far as if it's just one home, we wouldn't typically do that. If there's a bunch of homes that are going to consolidate, then we would look at why they're consolidating. So if those private wells are ranked in one of these categories, like say the private well has nitrate, for example, and a bunch of the private wells in the area have nitrate, and we're going to consolidate 20 homes into a nearby system, and they regularly have these, they're above the MCL in these private wells, then that would be eligible. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Bridget. So the last question that we have in the inbox is, given the need for investment in these sustainable solutions, especially in light of the California's 2018 efficiency legislation and needed economy recovery following the COVID-19, how will this IUP elevate/prioritize funding for these critical localized infrastructure projects?
Well, that's quite a big question. I'm not exactly sure how to answer that. You know, there are so many competing demands on the drinking, on the SRF programs in general, both of them. Yeah, the existing priority system doesn't, you know, obviously can't anticipate the COVID-19 impacts there. And so, yeah, I think the best thing that we can do at this point is, if you have something that is really critical, a local project that is really critical, let's talk a little bit more and find out how to get a complete application in and get you through the process as quickly as we can.
Thank you, Christopher. So we don't have any additional questions in Water SRF inbox. So now I'll be passing it along to Jenilyn.
Thank you, Tatiana, and thank you, Moises, and all of the State Water Board presenters for responding to questions, and thank you for all of the questions that we received today. So we're about 8 minutes ahead of schedule, yeah, I'd like to thank folks that are just joining us for the first part for the Drinking Water SRF. That thank you so much for your attention and for bearing with us as we navigate through this transition to remote participation. If there are any questions that you have that we did not get to or come up later, please email us at drinkingwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov. With that, we'll take approximately a 17-minute break and reconvene at 11 a.m. for the Clean Water SRF IUP discussion. Thank you. Okay, so the time is now 11 a.m. So we'll be starting the second portion for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan. So welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone had a refreshing break. And for those of us now joining, we just concluded the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan discussion. And as I just mentioned, we'll be starting the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan now. My name is Jenna Guzman. I'm with the Office of Public Participation, and I will be the facilitator for this workshop. This workshop is being held virtually through Zoom and is being recorded and webcast publicly. This workshop is for informational purposes only, and no formal action will be taken. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we have about 72 people participating with us on the Zoom platform or by phone. Some things to note is that we do not have the chat function on the Zoom platform. If the presentation is too big, please use the fit screen button. And for security purposes, all participants have their microphone and video turned off and will not have control over these features unless we invite them to share their audio. We will not show participants' video today, and typically a taskbar is found on the bottom of your Zoom window, but can also be found on the left side. There's usually a 30 to 60-second delay between the Zoom meeting and the webcast. And to improve streaming quality, most of our presenters will not be sharing their video. So again, I'd like to thank each of you for finding your way to joining us virtually. And we also thank you for your patience and understanding as we move to a virtual meeting space to adapt to the current public health concerns. We are doing our best to make sure that everyone can participate in an effective way and that this time is valuable for you. So just to reiterate some of the guidelines we have, if you get disconnected from Zoom, please rejoin the meeting. Take breaks as you need them. This workshop will be going until 12:30, and we will not have a break for the rest of the time. So please take care of yourself and take breaks as you need them. Folks participating on the call, as mentioned, you will have your microphones muted and cameras turned off during the presentation portions. And there will be an opportunity to provide comments and to ask questions after the presentation. And at that time, if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand through the participants window. And questions will be taken in the order they were received. And when it is your turn to speak, your name will be announced and you will be asked to turn on your microphone. This usually appears as a pop-up window on Zoom. And also please be sure to match your Zoom name to your real name. We will be looking at those. And lastly, for those watching at home, you can email your questions or comments to cleanwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov using the subject line as 2020-21 IUP workshop. If you are just tuning in and you wanted to provide comments or you had questions on the Drinking Water SRF IUP, you can still email us at drinkingwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov. With that being said, I'd like to introduce Christopher Stevens. Christopher Stevens is the Loan and Grant Assistant Deputy Director in the State Water Board's Division of Financial Assistance. Christopher oversees both the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and Clean Water State Revolving Fund programs. With that, Christopher, take it away, please.
Yes, thanks again, gentlemen, and welcome back, everyone, and welcome to those that maybe are just joining us for the Clean Water SRF portion. Just a little recap. As we've done the last several years, we have had workshops, the main difference being that we're doing them virtually this year. So the main difference here, usually in a physical setting, it's very easy to interact with the audience and people can ask us questions during the presentation. So that'll be a little different for us this year. We're going to do the presentation, run through that briefly. And then afterwards, we will have, as gentlemen talked about, we will have a question and discussion period. Again, just a reminder, if you want to participate through the Zoom platform, ask a question of us, you can raise your hand. through that process, or you can send an email to cleanwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov. And so, Melky, if you could advance to the next slide, please. We're going to have two speakers talking about the Clean Water SRF program and the associated complementary funding sources there. First is Bob Pontareri, who's one of our senior engineers in the Clean Water SRF program. And then again, Bridget Chase, from one of the supervising engineers from the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions, will be talking about money that's available for disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob. Take it away, Bob.
All right, thank you, Christopher. Hello, folks. Thanks for joining us. I am Bob Pontareri. I'm one of the senior engineers in the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program, and I will be going over the 2021 intended use plan for you today. Just a little background preview here on the presentation today. I'll present the first three sections. Those will cover a little background on the program updates, and a little bit of application demand. I will then hand off to Bridget Chase, who will present the small disadvantaged community sections. And then I'll chime back in and return to finish up the remaining sections. I'll go over the financial outlook, the fundable list and its development, the implementation and schedule, and then we'll have a question and answer session towards the end. So a little background on the program. The program was established in 1987. Clean Water SRF offers low interest loan funds and limited principal forgiveness, also known as non-repayable financing. State funding is available via the legislature or voter approved propositions. This funding provides complementary grant and loan funding that can be combined with Clean Water SRF funds. The program is guided by our policy, which was last amended in December of 2019. And the program is very popular. We currently have a demand that is exceeding $7 billion, which is a lot of money. A little bit on the basics of the IEP. So the IEP was posted to the website shown here. It's also available on various links on the DFA page, and I believe on the Clean Water SRF page as well. So the IEP is required to be submitted to US EPA annually by the program, and we do that by including it in our application for our CAP grant from US EPA. The way you think of the IEP, it's our business plan. It discusses our finances, staffing resources, goals, approach, and lays out specific eligibility requirements to receive financing for the SRF program. And we also include specific details on complementary funding as well. Eligible applicants and eligible costs. So typical applicants are listed here. They include a wide variety of public agencies, nonprofits, and tribes. Applicants can also include some private entities. So anyone with any questions about eligibility as far as an applicant type should be sure and contact our office for more details concerning the specific eligibilities. Costs include planning, construction costs, construction management, administration, and change order contingencies. I will note here that eligibility can be different for costs based on the funding source. So if you're getting money through one of the complementary funding sources, they may have different requirements based on that source. Eligible projects. Funding is available for POTWs for both wastewater and stormwater. Eligible projects also include projects that address non-point source issues, estuary plans, recycled water, treatment and distribution, There are many others. Please contact us for more details. We also offer some funding for providing new sewer connections for people that are going to come off of septics onto a sewer. So you should probably contact us for more detail about that as well. Next. So what's new? So we last amended the SRF policy, as I said, in December of 2019. The main purpose of the amendment was to streamline our final budget approval process. So the main idea there was to try to get funding out to the applicants quicker, or the recipients quicker, I should say, without the need to wait for an amendment to actually take place. So in some cases, an amendment won't be needed at all. In other cases, an amendment may be needed, but in general, we'll be able to disperse projects funds during that process. The main idea was, by reducing amendments, we're hoping to focus staff on actually funding more projects through the system. Our application form, so we're currently in the process of updating forms. So the forms for technical and general should be ready for posting very soon. The environmental and financial forms are currently posted and ready. But I'll note that no matter what form you turn in, we'll accept it. If it's been our older forms, that's fine. We may just have to ask additional questions. What stays the same? So the application process is the same. We still prefer you submit applications via FAST. It's the most efficient and effective method, but we will accept email applications. We will accept through the US mail. I will note that if you do send it through email, it can be difficult if you submit it directly to a person, because if that person is on vacation, your application is going to sit there till they come back. We've actually had it submitted to somebody who was deployed on the National Guard, so we didn't know they had submitted something for several months. So that's why we prefer FAST. It gives you a timestamp and it gives us the same information quickly. The process is a continuous application process. So we're always accepting applications. The only caveat there would be that if your project is one of those that has to be scored, then you need to have all your deadline documents in that need to be scored by the December 31st deadline each year. Eligible costs can start at the notice to proceed. There's a little caveat there. Usually we would have to have done some review if you start before there's an actual executed agreement. So you should probably let us know if you're planning to do that. And I want to note here that we still offer an incentive for those who want to take a shorter term financing of 20 years. You can receive an incentive of a reduced interest rate by 0.25%. So whatever the standard rate is, we'll reduce it by 0.25%. Okay, current application demand. It's very high. There's a very high demand on the SRF. It's a very popular program. You can see we currently have 241 applications being processed. Close to $7.9 billion worth of funding is requested. Currently, we have 60 rollover projects from the previous list. We have 105 disadvantaged community projects. And one note here is that for the DAC projects, as you can see, they make up a small percentage of the total dollar demand on the program. And then we have 66 projects that we scored this year. We had 10 projects that actually asked to not be scored. They remain on our comprehensive list, however, because they wanted to, they didn't feel they had enough documentation in-house to receive a high enough score. but they also didn't want to get knocked off the list. So we will allow them to remain on the comprehensive list. Next slide. And I'm going to hand off to Bridget Chase, who will discuss the small disadvantaged communities. Bridget.
Thank you, Bob. So my name is Bridget Chase. I'm from the Division's Office of Sustainable Water Solutions. So the slides I will be presenting are specific to small community funding. So this first slide includes definitions that we use in the Clean Water IUP. If you listened to the drinking water presentation earlier this morning, you may notice that the definition for small community for wastewater projects is less than 20,000 people, while the drinking water use is a population of less than 10,000 people. A community is considered disadvantaged if their median household income, or MHI, is less than 80% of the statewide MHI, and they are considered severely disadvantaged, or SDAC, if their MHI is less than 60% of the statewide MHI. Small disadvantaged communities are not included on the fundable list that is listed in the IUP because we don't require these applications to be ranked or scored to be added to the list. That being said, our current demand for grant and principal forgiveness funding exceeds the available funds that we have. We do plan to award funding based on readiness to proceed and availability of funding, with our priority being on construction projects. The following table could be found in Appendix H of the draft IUP. Small DACs may receive up to 100% planning grant for a project with a maximum grant available of $500,000 per project. This table can be found in Appendix F of the draft Clean Water IUP. Construction projects for small DACs may be eligible for up to $6 million in grants or principal forgiveness, or $30,000 per connection, whichever is less. If the community is severely disadvantaged, they may be eligible for up to 100% grant regardless of their wastewater rates. If the community is considered disadvantaged, their wastewater rates must be at least 1.5% of the community's median household income to qualify for up to 75% grant. Some small non-disadvantaged communities may be eligible for up to 50% grant if their water rates are at least 4% of their MHI. So their water rates would have to be pretty high. This table is specific to septic to sewer projects or regional construction projects and can be found in Appendix D of the draft IUP. Because these projects typically cost more, they may receive up to $75,000 per connection or up to $8 million per project. Similar to the previous slide, SDACs may receive up to 100% grant regardless of their wastewater rates, and small DACs may receive up to 75% of grant if their wastewater rates are at least 1.5% of the community's median household income. This is my last slide that I will be sharing today, but I will be available to help answer any questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you for your time, and I will pass it back to Bob.
Okay, thank you, Bridget. So I have a slide up here about talking about recent financing from the SRF and the complementary sources. So let's take a look at it. So as you can notice, that the total financing numbers vary greatly. It looks like 2017 was our highest year in the recent past 5 years. So we had about 110 agreements go out that year, about 1.7 billion in funding, which was great. 2018 was similar, and then you'll notice in 2019 rather, that we had a pretty significant drop off. That drop off was, as Wynn had stated this morning, for those who were on the drinking water workshop, the state implemented the fiscal system, and that really impacted our program greatly. And so it continued with those impacts all through 2019, and then we were coming out of it in 2020, as you can see, but we're still a little bit behind schedule of where we would like to have been. But now then we got hit with the COVID thing, and so we're all doing this telework thing. So that is also affecting us a little bit, but we've worked our way through that in March, and In April, we're pretty much back to business, and things are starting to pick up now. So we hope that we can come back to our new normal. Financial outlook for the program. The 2021 SRF loan capacity is now going to be at 586 million for loans. This is a target long-term average. There's about 107 million in grant and principal forgiveness funding is currently available for DACs. And principal forgiveness is limited to DACs. In the past, we had offered some principal forgiveness to GPR projects, but we're not offering that currently. There is also limited loan and grant funds available for water recycling projects. There's about 40 million in grant funds. There's a $5 million cap per project on the grants. And there's about 48.4 million in loan funds. The terms are basically the same as the Clean Water SRF. So let's talk about the lending capacity. So I think as Christopher noted earlier, we did have a new financial advisor. They did an updated lending capacity calculation and came up with the 586 million per year. So they built us a new model, as Christopher stated earlier. The model has been vetted against similar SRFs. California's data was input into the Texas model. We had similar results. And the clean water staff were very involved in the development of assumptions used and the methodology used to build the model. So we have a high confidence level with the new model. One note here is that the lower capacity does not affect the ability for DAC applicants to get funding. Since this is really only meant for those that actually get scored, that's the limitation we have when we're applying them to the fundable list. Next slide. Fundable list. So what is the fundable list? So the fundable list identifies projects that DFA expects to fund during the fiscal year. Projects on the fundable list are eligible to be funded as long as they meet all of our requirements and they get eventually approved for financing. Some projects may be determined at a later date to be ineligible for various reasons. And sometimes the applicants request to be removed from the list as well. And as Bridget stated earlier, DACs are not shown on the fundable list since they're automatically included and they do not receive a priority score. And we feel that since demand far exceeds the SRF's loan capacity, ranking and scoring of the scored projects is warranted. The yearly loan capacity is a target, so the 586 million is our target. So staff are required when we're developing the list to put projects into a range between 90% of that number and 125% of the loan capacity number. So what that means is the funding levels are going to range between 527 million on the low end to about 733 million on the upper end. So scoring and ranking. So the score is made up of 3 components. There's a primary score, a secondary score, and a readiness score. So just talking about a primary score, that's pretty much set by policy. There's not much the applicant can do. Their project either fits in, each are meant to be exclusive of each other. So the varying types of projects that you have fit in and you get a score based on that, up to 9 points. The secondary and the readiness score are pretty much driven by the applicant. It all depends on how far along you are with plans and specs, whether you've submitted a complete application, whether you've completed various other documents that in the secondary score particularly. So you control those two scores. The maximum score is 16. So one thing we'll note is cutoff score is developed. And if you're included in that score, so if the cutoff score was 10, everybody that's in a 10 would be included. We don't cut off in the middle of a cutoff score. So if you're, whatever score ends up being the cutoff score is all in, and all the others that are below that would be out. Next slide. So where did we start? So way back in December, everybody submitted their documents. And then in January, clean water staff scored all the documents. And then we allowed applicants to review their score sheets. After that, we worked our way through the draft IUP, put it out for comment. So where are we today? We're at public review, basically. You will be able to submit comments all the way up to June 10th at noon on June the 10th, and then we'll go to the board for adoption on June the 16th. So our financing scenarios that we looked at. So you'll note that there were no projects that scored a 15 or a 16, so they were excluded completely. So scenario A included all projects scoring 14 points. So we had 5 projects that scored 14. The funding total for those reached $303 million. The issue with scenario A is it doesn't quite reach the minimum requirement of the 90% minimum. So we had to drop to scenario B. Scenario B brought the total projects up to 23, but the total funding amount for scenario B was $910 million. Scenario B would also include all the projects that score 13 or higher, so that would include all the A's and all the B's. The issue with scenario B is it exceeded the 125% maximum range. And then if you look at scenario C, that included projects that scored 12 or higher, but the total projects jumped up quite a bit to 36, and then the funding amount at almost 1.5 billion was well above the maximum of the range. So I'm more graphical type person. So here's a graph that kind of depicts it. So if you look at the graph, you can see that scenario B was a little bit below the target range, which is shown in yellow. Scenario A rather, and scenario B was above the range, and scenario C is well above the range. So we were really trying to target to try to figure out how to get projects as close to that target range as possible. Next slide, please. So what we came up with, basically staff was tasked to develop a fundable list that would accomplish 2 things. One, we wanted to try to clear the backlog of the rollover projects by the end of the 2021 fiscal year. And we wanted to add as many projects as reasonable that we could reasonably expect to receive their approvals and finance agreements by June 30th of 2021. So we came up with this scenario. We recommend scenario A with a cutoff score of 14 points, with an option allowing the Deputy Director of DFA to include scenario B projects that scored 13 points if good progress is made on clearing rollover projects by October or November of 2020. Also, this would involve no partial funding would need to be implemented. Further, so just to talk about a little bit more, so the 14 funding needs is about 303 million, including the 13s expands it to 903 million. And this, we realize, does exceed the 125%. But keep in mind that the funding target is meant to be a long-term average, and we have executed well below our average of the past couple years. And staff believes that implementing partial funding at that late into the year in November, if we were to include the 13s, if we go with if the option is implemented, that would be sort of unfair to those projects that were scored 14s that would also all of a sudden be partially funded. So the idea here is to not implement partial funding to any of the projects. Next slide. Mel, can you go to the next slide, please?
This is the next slide.
Okay, I think I just talked about that particular slide. I think you're one slide back. So I can go back through this one. So okay, so if the cutoff score is lowered to 13, it would increase the estimated CF need above the 125%, just as I stated. And it wouldn't be fair to implement partial funding at this point as well. The target is meant to be, as I said, a long-term average, and we've been under the estimated average for the past 2 years as it is. Next. Thank you. So schedule. So let's talk about the schedule now. So we posted the IEP on May the 11th. We're currently holding the webinar now. Today is May 20th. The deadline to submit is June 10th. So all comments are due by noon on June the 10th. And we'll have the board meeting is scheduled for June 16th. And at that time, you could also submit comments orally at the board meeting. Next slide. So this is just a slide talking about different ways of submitting the comments. Details are included in the notice of opportunity to comment that went out. Oral comments are welcome at the board meeting. It'll probably be a Zoom meeting as well. And then written comments are due by noon on June the 10th. And they should be emailed, faxed, or mailed to Janine Townsend, the clerk of the board, at 1001 I Street on the 24th floor. Next slide. So now we'll I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. This completes my presentation, and we are now available to answer questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. And
gentlemen, thanks.
Thanks. Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Bridget, for your presentations. As Bob mentioned, we'll be transitioning to the question and answer portion of today's workshop. So we'll be taking questions from both Zoom participants and questions from the Clean Water SRF email address. And as a reminder to folks participating on the Zoom call, please raise your hand if you have a question. This can be done by scrolling over the bottom of your Zoom window until a taskbar appears. Then you click on Participants, and under the list of participants, there is a button titled Raise Hand. In terms of procedure, Moises will will announce the participant when it's your turn, Moises will introduce you and you will receive a request through Zoom to share your microphone. We kindly ask you to be mindful of the limited time we have here today and keep questions succinct. We have about 50 minutes for questions and responses. And after the Zoom participants, we'll be taking questions from the Clean Water SRF email. So in the event we aren't able to get to everyone on Zoom, please email us at cleanwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov. And this goes for folks that are tuning into the webcast online and for folks that are calling in and do not have the raise hand function. So today we have Bob, Bridget, and Christopher who will be responding to questions. We also have a few folks from our Office of Chief Counsel here to respond as well. And with that, I'd like to pass this off to Moises to head off the Q&A.
Thank you, gentlemen. And I've been writing down a list and I have a queue going. So if I don't call you first, just know that your name is on this list. We'll first start with Heather Miranda, and I will now prompt you to unmute and please ask your question.
Good morning. Thank you for the workshop. For disadvantaged communities, would you accept, there's a special kind of survey where you can go into a community that wouldn't be considered traditionally DAC and quantify disadvantaged communities, and is that something that you will accept? And also, second question, complementary funding, am I hearing that that's a separate process? So if you don't need your project fully funded and you have other things, that there's a separate process in the complementary funding category?
This is Bridget. I'll take that first question. So the way that we determine if a community is disadvantaged is we use American Community Survey data, which is through the census data website. And if that data we have is not accurate, we can also do income surveys, but we won't accept other random ways of determining if a community is disadvantaged. That being said, I wouldn't discourage, if you do have something like that, I would still share it with your project manager and we could definitely take it into consideration as far as what we should do from there.
Okay, so if we did income surveys, that would be something that we produce an income survey, that would be an acceptable document.
Yes, we have income survey guidelines. So long as they were done through that, then yes, that would be acceptable.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then to this, Bob, so I'll take the question on the complementary funding. I think I can describe it best. So there is really no additional process. So the application you submit to the Clean Water SRF should cover you. If we try to work at more of an internal process, if we have complementary funding and your project type or applicant type fits into that complementary funding, we will work to try to get you that funding as well.
Thank you for all those who answered the question. We're now moving on to Bobby Larson.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Bobby.
Okay, great. This is Bobby Larson. I'm a special advisor to the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, and thank you for the opportunity. I do have two questions. The first has to do with the financial capacity analysis. Obviously, perhaps not surprisingly, we are a little concerned about going from 90 to 125% of $1 billion to 90 to 125% of less than 6,000 as far as the funding capacity. And I know Bob mentioned that this was vetted and that staff was very involved and understands very well. And I think Christopher, this morning during the drinking water session, you indicated that from your perspective, it was very transparent. from the perspective of the stakeholder community, it's not very transparent. And so I guess I wanted to pose the question of whether or not you would be willing to share with stakeholders, either in a meeting or in some other manner, the financial model and analysis so that we could understand better. And in particular, if we know what factors that could be changed through advocacy or other actions on our part that would allow that capacity analysis to go back up, that would be very helpful.
Yes, absolutely. It is a proprietary model, so we don't actually possess it. But yes, we did. We sat in a room with a financial advisor and walked through all of the different tables and the calculations and the way they're done. But yeah, I think that we could work with the financial advisor to summarize, provide a description of that methodology, and provide you some of the, the list of the factors that went into that and what those factors are and how they influence the outcome. We did play around with a lot of different things, and some factors you think, well, this will have a dramatic impact, and you hit the button to calculate, and it really doesn't have that much effect. But yeah, we would be very willing to sit down with all of you and walk you through that process so that you understand it better.
Thank you very much, Christopher. And my second question has to do with the recommended fundable list and the scenario scenario B, I think it is, which would, again, as we look at the almost $8 billion in demand, and we look at, potentially only funding 5 new projects this year, that is a little discouraging as well for us. And when I look at scenario B, I hope I'm getting these right, the scenario that would add those additional projects that scored a 13, that would take you to about 900 million, I believe Bob said. And under your new financial capacity analysis, that isn't in the window. It certainly is smack dab in the middle of what we would have said last year. So I guess you may be getting a recommendation from us to just add those projects when we do our written comments. But my question for now is, what does good progress mean? What kind of metrics are going to be used by Leslie and you to determine whether or not those projects will go on the fundable list?
Yeah, and I wish I could come up with a formula in advance to say exactly what good progress is. Specifying things is good in one sense, but it's a two-edged sword in some cases. And so I don't necessarily want to get boxed into, well, we set out these criteria, and this is what it's going to take to make good progress. And therefore, if we don't meet those, well, then what do we do? We're sort of boxed ourselves into a corner there. And the ultimate goal is we want to execute all of the scored projects on the fundable list by the end of the fiscal year. Now, as Bob touched on, some of them are going to drop out, some of them can't be for various reasons, so we'll have to take that into consideration. But really, one of the realities that we're dealing with this year is we're starting out with 60 rollover projects because of all the curveballs we've had. We won't beat a dead horse there. But so that really influenced the recommendation that we're making here. And that's why we recommended scenario A, which is 5 projects with the option to go to scenario B. How are we going to work through this? We were already working through and developing a plan to fund all of those rollover projects and try to catch up. Right there, that's about 1.5 years worth of agreements based on our typical throughput on scored projects. And then we got hit with the COVID thing, so that's knocked us back a little bit. But yeah, we're developing a plan to execute those rollover projects and try to go to 13 on the cutoff score. And that's what I'm setting out as a goal, is to go to 13. Whether we can do that or not, we're going to evaluate that come September, October. And it's not going to be that a certain number of agreements are executed, because there's a whole continuum there. There's a whole spectrum there. And so we're really going to have to make a judgment as to how much progress we've made on the rollover projects and the 14s, and whether we can do all of that and add the 13 projects and get those executed by the end of the year.
Thank you, Christopher. Our next person on our queue is Jennifer West.
Mute. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Jennifer.
Great, thank you so much. So I want to echo Bobby's comments that when Water Reuse California was looking at your intended use plan, we were disappointed that it calls for a reduction in your funding capacity by 41%. And I guess more of a statement that looking at this program, we were hoping it would provide and be one of the mechanisms to provide economic stimulus as we're looking at, you know, a severe economic downturn with COVID-19. And obviously it was highlighted in the governor's draft water resiliency portfolio to actually be more aggressive moving forward, that California could potentially do more. So with those two things, and then seeing that the reduction in the long-term funding capacity, it was in fact not clear what we had lots of questions about the assumptions in terms of your federal capitalization grant in terms of what you were looking at. It looked like you were looking at an amount going forward that was considerably less than the current fiscal year. We had lots of questions about the assumptions and the methodology. So we look forward to meeting with you, getting a better sense on why that is happening. And then I guess going forward, just wanting to communicate from a large membership how much we're depending on this program, and, you know, looking at ways to actually do more. So I guess we were kind of hoping that it would be larger in the face of the economic downturn in California rather than going the other way. So I guess it's more of a statement, but I look forward to working with you and understanding that economic model. And I think that's my main point at this point. I think that's it.
Well, and I appreciate those comments. And as I indicated to Bobby, yes, we're more than happy to sit down and walk folks through this process. I will say that, you know, the model was developed in advance of the economic downturn. I mean, you know, I certainly couldn't see that and try to build that into the model. And the model really is intended to be a long-term model. It's based on a fairly long time horizon, you know, 20 or 30 years. And so, you know, there are things that can be done in the short term, obviously, but that's not really the intent of the model. The other thing I would say is, yeah, I was disappointed to get the results myself. I knew that there would be a difference between the two financial advisors because different people approach the same problem in different ways. That's to be expected. I wasn't expecting that dramatic a difference. And as I sort of quickly alluded to this morning or earlier, the first financial advisor we had, they're not under contract, so I cannot resolve the differences between them. I don't have an explanation for that. And really what I focused on was, okay, Hilltop as the financial advisor, what can we do to increase our confidence that what you've shown us are reliable results? And so those are the things that Bob and I touched on, the additional things that we asked them to do, comparing results with other models and having other independent folks take a look at it, so on and so forth. So we can't really ignore the numbers that Hilltop has given us. I don't think that's a viable option. But certainly, yeah, let's sit down and talk more in detail about how we came up with these numbers and what sort of things we can do to influence them in the future.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Christopher. The next person that I have on queue is Ahal.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate the answer, Christopher. I was going to ask a question as well as Bobby and Jennifer have about the financial model and getting some of the assumptions and whatnot, what have you behind that. So I appreciate your willingness to share that because I think, you know, as they mentioned, that is a significant change and we are concerned about that. One of the other concerns that we've had is related to that backlog and recognize the impacts that you guys have had from fiscal. We've had an extended period on at least one of our agreements of just trying to get through the process for a number of reasons. And as we were reviewing the resources and workload section, noticed that over the last couple of years, you've gone down about 1 personnel year a year. Is that, do you anticipate continuing to have reductions in available staff in the program in the foreseeable future? Is this just a short-term issue? And do you envision potentially being able to go back to previous levels to help address that workload issue long-term?
Well, I wouldn't, I'm not hopeful of any new staff, let's put it that way. With the current situation that we're in, no, I don't see new staff coming on board. The division did receive a lot of additional staffing because of the SAFER program, as well as the board. And so that's really been the focus there. It's like the lights went out there. So I'm not expecting a dramatic decrease in staffing, but I'm not expecting any increase in staffing either.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Ahal. The next person that I have on queue is Heather Ramamarthy.
Thank you. I have a simple question here. What is meant by the restriction on partial funding? I might be missing something here, and why would it not be permissible, and how would that help? I might be just misunderstanding the definition. Could you please explain?
So we have used partial funding in the past couple of years. Bob talked about the funding range there, this 90 to 125% range that we're trying to shoot for. And so the past 2 years, we had recommended certain projects, very large projects, only receive partial funding. We're not recommending any partial funding this year, however. So it's not really that we're restricted to provide partial funding. That's one of the restrictions that we provide, we place on projects when we're recommending them for the fundable list.
Oh, could I add a little bit there, Christopher? So, and when we're developing that upper range or the second scenario, it would have required us to implement partial funding to drop them within the range. So we would have had to drop everybody, and if we did that, that would include dropping people that had projects in scenario A, and we didn't think that was fair. So just the way it broke out, partial funding would have been required had we included the 13s from the start to get us into within the ranges of how we're supposed to develop the list. So we opted to come up with this alternate solution and add the 13s later, but then we would not use partial funding at that point.
And when you do your progress review in the October-November timeframe to discern how far along you are in whittling down the backlog, how will that change in regards to, if you're not partially funding, how will you suddenly in October, November have the funding available, regardless of the size of your backlog?
Well, we're recommending that all of those projects, if we recommend to the deputy director to implement that option to go to 13, then all of those projects would be recommended for the full amount that they're requesting.
And then keep in mind that we operate on a cash flow basis, so we would know ahead of time whether we're including the whole 903 million, and then we would be looking at our cash flows and making a determination on whether we needed to go to the bond market sooner or later in order to finance everybody.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Bob and Christopher. The next person that I have on queue here is David Peterson.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. So I wanted to say that we definitely appreciate the inclusion of the focus on clearing the backlog of rollover projects in the recommendation, and we think that's really important. Many of us supported the transition to the fundable list approach really because of the backlog, and we were hopeful that it was going to be a better means to address the backlog. Unfortunately, that hasn't really happened, and in fact, we continue to see the backlog grow. And I have to share, there's a little frustration that it feels like each year with the IUP that we overpromise what can be delivered in the coming years and under-deliver. And I think we should be cautious about continuing that because it only leads to disappointment and frustration. And so in thinking about that, I just wanted to point out that the backlog, I think if I got the numbers right, there's actually 60 projects, 60 contracts amounting to $5.6 billion. And so what I'm wondering is, in this business plan, are there adequate streamlining measures proposed that would truly allow the delivery of contracts in that amount, 60 for 5.6 billion, in addition to item A or scenario A, that's another 5 for 303 million? Is it realistic to consider that that's even feasible by June 30th of 2021? And have we considered bold enough streamlining measures to the program where we could say confidently that that is possible?
Well, just one clarification here. So the 60 projects, the actual financed amount will be, if memory serves me, it's going to be about 2 or 2.5 billion. So that's the actual amount requested by those projects, but a number of those are partially funded. So to answer your larger question, is it realistic to execute 65 or what's the other, 83 scored projects by June 2021? And yes, I believe it is possible to do that. I can't guarantee it. I wouldn't be that foolish, but is that possible? If you look at some of the numbers that we've done in the past, I would even go back to the era time frame where we did a lot of work in a very short period of time. Yes, I think it can be done. And I don't think it is outrageous to think that it can be done. Is it going to require some focus and execution on our part? Absolutely. No question about that. But typically our average number of agreements, scored agreements, just talking scored agreements, in the range of about 40 per year. So yeah, that's a 1.5 to 2 years worth of work in 1 year. It can be done and has been done in the past a number of times. What complicates that somewhat is we also have the new SAFER program, and so there's a lot of emphasis on that, and there are shared resources between the Drinking Water SRF and its complementary programs, including the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, as well as the Clean Water SRF and its complementary funding sources. So yeah, we've got our work cut out for us, but yes, it is possible to do that, in my view. And that's certainly what we're going to try to do.
Thank you, Christopher. Are there any more questions via the Zoom chat? And if you do have any questions, please raise your hand. Right. Next is, well, Jennifer, we're going to go with you. And then if there's any other questions, anyone feel free to email cleanwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov.
Yeah, I just have a clarifying question. When you talk about clean water, what exactly are the complementary programs? So you're combining, when you talk about your totals that have gone out in the past few years, you say the Clean Water SRF and complementary programs. Is that the water reuse funding program? And what other are there other programs?
Sure. Well, it would have been all of the programs that were involved with Proposition 1 and Proposition 68. So yes, some of those are in the water recycling funding program as well. And I think they have some additional sources here and there as well. So there's a multitude of different sources that we call complementary. But it's mainly the propositions, I would say.
And I guess that was what was confusing me when I was looking at the IUP and I was trying to get a handle on, you know, what were the clean water SRF projects, because obviously there was bond monies and requirements separate for the water reuse, for the water recycling Prop 1 funding that came from a separate source. So I guess I think just a recommendation that if that could be spelled out, I went through, it's probably somewhere in an appendix, but if you could just delineate what was clean water SRF and not lump it in with the other complementary programs, then people can have a better understanding of those programs, just and the funding needs and so forth. So
Jennifer, what might help you is there is a section, section 3, and it talks about the various funding sources that we have and a rundown of, you know, what funds are available in those funding sources. And then the other thing that might be helpful to you is if you look at the fundable list, we try to estimate what sources of funds each project is going to get. And so we have different columns for loan funds, water recycling loan funds, small community grant funds, principal forgiveness. And so we try to match those things up.
thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Christopher. If there are no more questions via the Zoom platform, we are now moving towards the email questions. If you do have questions that you'd like to be asked or answered during this portion, please email them at cleanwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov. I will now hand it over to my colleague Tatiana, and she will be fielding those questions sent via email.
Thank you, Moises. So now I'll be reading questions submitted to the Clean Water SRF inbox. The first question we have is about the Drinking Water SRF and Clean Water SRF application deadline, and what is the benefit of submitting the application early?
So there's no deadline for the Drinking Water SRF application. There is a deadline associated with the Clean Water SRF applications, and there is a fundable list that we develop, which is, you can see in the Clean Water SRF IUP this year. And so we have gone to a fundable list. In order to get on that fundable list, you have to be scored, unless you're a disadvantaged or small severely disadvantaged or small disadvantaged community. Those are automatically considered fundable if they have funding. But if you are not a disadvantaged community or severely disadvantaged community, then you need to be scored. And part of that score is a readiness score. And part of that readiness score is submitting a complete application. You get 2 additional points out of 16 if you submit a complete application to us by December 31st of the year.
Well, I could add that one of the benefits would be that by submitting your application earlier and not waiting till the last minute, your application is actually assigned to a project manager who can give it a quick glance and look at it and kind of let you know if you're missing any documentation that are going to affect your score, and therefore giving you in a little advance notice of what you need to get in, if you can, to receive the highest score possible. If you wait until the December 31st deadline to submit your package, then it's highly likely that it's not going to be considered complete, and you're going to probably be missing a point. So, and as you can see, that 1 point can make the difference of being included and not included. So we want everybody to get as high a score as they possibly can and to start working with us as early as they can.
Thank you, Bob. So the next question is, why do water recycling funding program projects need to be included in the IUP list? And does this delay any funding? And does the project require federal cross-cutter requirements?
So a multi-part question there. Why do water recycling projects need to be on the fundable list? The vast majority of water recycling projects are funded with a combination of water recycling funds that we have on hand at various points. Usually we have some, sometimes more than others, but almost all of them get a combination of funding. And in fact, both Prop 1 and Prop 68 restricted the amount of proposition funds that we could give to water recycling projects. So if people wanted full funding for their project, we had to provide clean water SRF funding to do that. I would say the vast majority of water recycling projects do get a combination of those funds. And as we've talked about, there's a lot of different programs that we're running here in DFA. And so the only way we can try to achieve everything that the legislature and the people of California want us to achieve is to try to run those programs and use our resources effectively for all of those programs. And that means sharing resources. So we need to run those programs in conjunction with each other. The other part of the question there is, so does that delay water recycling projects getting funded? No, I don't think it does. And as far as the cross-cutters go, if somebody doesn't want clean water SRF funds, then they make that decision early on. As they say, there are some projects that just want grant funds. We let people make that decision, but part of that decision is that we will not be able to provide loan funds later on because we really can't backtrack and do the federal cross-cutters at the 11th hour. So if somebody just wants to take state dollars, then yes, we can do that. But that's going to mean that they're only going to get part of the project funding from us. They're going to have to get those other dollars somewhere else.
Thank you, Christopher. The next question I have is the 903 million listed in the Plan B the total projects scored 13 or projects rated 13 and 14?
So the 903 includes those that are scored 13 and 14. So that's cumulative.
Thank you, Christopher. And then the next question is, could you comment on funding all projects with a score of 13 and 14 points is possible by capping funding amounts to the large projects?
So as Bob touched on, yes, it would be possible if we, hang on a second, I apologize.
Well, if we were to add everybody from the start, it is possible. And we would have, in order to do that, we would go with the partial funding of the projects that were high dollar value targets. So by going with the option, the recommendation that we're doing, we're actually not going to do that to anybody, and everybody's going to end up, in a way, those that are a 13 end up in a better situation because now they can be fully funded versus if we partially fund them, if you were to run the number, I'm not sure what it would be, but it's going to be at least a 30% reduction, if not larger than that. And I don't think that makes the larger projects folks happier either. So this is also a good way to, that's another alternative way to think about it. I don't know if Christopher wanted to add anything other.
Sorry, the dangers of doing a webcast at work, I guess. Sorry, Tatiana, could you repeat the question for me, please?
Yes, let me just. Yes. So funding all projects with a score of 13 and 14 points, is it possible by capping funding amounts to the large projects?
Yeah, so sorry if I repeat something that Bob said here while I was distracted, but it would be possible to do that. And the reason we didn't recommend that from the start, go straight to 13, is that there's 23 projects. So that's with the 60 rollovers, that's 83 projects. We really want to get that backlog down. I think that's a legitimate comment to get that backlog down. I don't know that we've really had the opportunity to part of the reason for going, as David mentioned, part of the reason for going to a fundable list was to try to get folks more certainty on their funding. And I don't know that we've really had an opportunity to see the full effect of going to a fundable list because we had to tackle a fiscal thing. And so, you know, the main thing we need to do this year is focus on getting that backlog down. And so in order to try to do that, we thought that it would be better to recommend 14 as a starting point with the option to go to 13. And so we don't want to overpromise, as somebody mentioned there. And I think that might be overpromising. I can't, you know, it's not a totally cut and dried calculation there. But we thought that it would be better to start at 14 and try to work our way down to the 13s.
Thank you, Christopher. It looks like someone on Zoom has raised their hand. So I will pass it back to Moises so that he could unmute the person who raised their hand through Zoom.
Yeah, so David Peterson's up.
Thank you. Just wanted to comment. I think certainly we all acknowledge that there are things outside of DFA's control in managing the program, and we appreciate that, fiscal being one example. I think currently the COVID-19 crisis is probably another good example of things outside of all of our control. But in that light, there is discussion at the federal level about a stimulus package. Certainly we've seen the HEROES Act pass at least the House and propose some pretty significant investments in infrastructure as a means of economic stimulus for our nation. As those discussions unfold, I think we're going to see a focus on if that moves forward, how would that be administered? And naturally, there's going to be a look at existing federal and state programs that could support moving funds out for infrastructure investment. It would seem to me that these SRF programs would be one logical option. And so I wanted to ask what your thoughts are and if you had begun to consider how that would be managed and what would that mean for the current program proposal and how would you be able to respond to that increased need?
So a very good question. And yeah, I've monitored a couple of different channels for information about what goes on at the federal level. I didn't see anything in the HEROES Act that would affect the SRF programs. There is a couple of bills on the Senate side that have passed the Environment and Public Works Committee. And so we'll go to, you know, a vote at some point, perhaps. Not an expert on that process, but yeah, there's a reauthorization of the Clean Water Act, and then there's some money for the drinking water SRF program as well. So yes, it's certainly something to be aware of. I don't think that we're really in a position to count any chickens in the IUP, so to speak, and count that as money that's going to come to the SRF programs. But it definitely could, and you know, that's been my experience anyway, that things things happen more frequently during a crisis that maybe didn't happen in the past or have been sitting on the shelf for a while. So it is certainly possible, and I'm working with Bobby Larson at CASA, and we're going to have a discussion here coming up in a couple of weeks to maybe flesh that out a little bit more. But definitely, if there was a big chunk of money that came to the SRF program or programs, either one of them, the last time it happened was back in 2009, 2010. The economic stimulus that came to the programs, and so you saw a bunch of money go out there, and there was really a lot of activity. That was certainly complicated by furloughs at the time. There is some talk of furloughs these days, so that would probably be a situation as well. The one difference there between now and then was we were able to shift a lot of staff internally because the state was not selling bonds at the time. So there were a lot of projects that we switched over from state bond funds to clean water SRF funds. And so we had a lot of that staff that could work on that. But yeah, that was also an exciting time. And so yeah, depending upon the strings that come with it from the federal government, yeah, we would have some sort of reaction to that. And I'm not sure that I know all the answers to that, but yeah, definitely a topic in my mind to be thinking about.
Thank you, Christopher. So we have another question in the Clean Water SRF inbox. How will staff overcome the Clean Water SRF application/agreement backlog?
So as I've touched on, there's a backlog of about 60 projects that are rolling over on the scored portion of the fundable list. Now, I would say that there's probably a couple of those that have already been executed because we put that list together in February. And there's certainly been a movement, although it's been complicated by the teleworking situation that we're having to switch over, that we switched over to in March and April. But yeah, we have a plan. We're coming up with a plan for executing those in addition to the ones that we add to the fundable list, along with the disadvantaged communities. So we have to work those into the overall plan because the administrative resources associated with that are in many cases shared. So yes, we will be planning and monitoring on a monthly basis how we execute those agreements to try to, as I say, my goal is to recommend to Leslie that we go to 13 on the cutoff score. And the only way we can do that is to make significant progress.
Thank you, Christopher. This may be the last question. We have a question about if you could provide a discussion of why the estimated fiscal 20 to 12 funding is being reduced from the last several years when demand is increasing.
Yes, and so that is based on a recommendation from our financial advisor, that sustainable level of funding. And there are a lot of different factors that go into that. I think one of the factors that we've touched on here is, well, a couple of them just off the top of my head, capitalization levels from the federal government through US EPA, our ability to go out into the bond market, and we do have equity in the fund. We can use repayments from loans that we've made in the past. We can use that to borrow money in the municipal bond market. Of course, there are interest rates associated with that, the interest rates that we charge to applicants, how much money we divert into the small community grant fund. Those are just some of the factors that go into that. And so all of that is taken into consideration as we build a financial model and try to come up with an idea of what's a reasonable amount of funding, loan funding, that we can do on a yearly basis, year in and year out. And so we could go out in 1 year and borrow a whole bunch of money and loan it out in theory. I'm just talking in theory here. But that would mean that in the following years, we would have a much lower loan rate. And so we're trying to operate the program on a sustainable basis, on a consistent basis, year in and year out. And so we've worked with our financial advisor to figure out what that number is. And that number is significantly different from the recommendation we got from the previous financial advisor. And as I indicated earlier, that financial advisor is not under contract to us, so they're not under any obligation to show us how they came up with those calculations. And we didn't, we probably should have gone into more depth on how they do their calculations, but be that as it may, we didn't. And so we've tried to do that in much more detail with our new financial advisor. And so we have confidence that they've done a good job, and we can't ignore their recommendation there. That would not be a prudent thing for us to do. And so that's the recommendation that we're going to the board. And we, as I say, we want to operate the program on a sustainable level into the future in a prudent fashion.
Thank you, Christopher. We have two more questions. The first question is about the construction start date. If a project is listed on the IUP at one point, while the project is still under the State Water Board's review, can the agency start construction and have all construction costs eligible without risking their loan?
Well, that's, I'm sorry.
Oh, and is this the same? Is it the same for the drinking water and clean water projects?
So I'll answer the second part of the question first. Yes, the policy is the same for both the clean water and drinking water SRF. So I'll start by answering the first part of the question by saying that we don't approve the project. It's not our project. What we're doing is we're providing financing for the project. So it's up to the applicant to decide when they start construction, but there are significant risks associated with them doing that before they have an executed agreement. So I would strongly recommend, if at all possible, that you not do that, that you wait until you get an executed agreement. We don't do things based on a promise or verbally or anything like that. All of our financing agreements are in writing. Our Office of Chief Counsel spends a great deal of time making sure that it's a valid contract and that everything is going to work out the way it should. And so I would strongly recommend that you not start construction until you have that executed financing agreement. I know that that's not possible in certain cases. You have deadlines and schedules that you have to meet. And so you don't need our permission to go to start construction. But as I say, there's significant risks associated with that. And if you do something which prevents us from executing the agreement, then that's a bad situation to be in, and why I'm trying to really steer people away from doing that. The biggest risks are associated with the environmental review, not the only risks associated with that, but the biggest risks are that you would start construction, and if there's endangered species or there's some cultural resources there, we have to go out and consult with U.S. Fish and Wildlife in some cases, the National Marine Fisheries in other cases, and the State Historic Preservation Officer. And if we go to them and we say, well, we'd like to consult on this project because we want to finance it, and oh, by the way, they've already started construction, that really throws a big monkey wrench into things, because the whole purpose of consulting with those agencies is they want to see what you plan on doing and how you're going to do it and when you're going to do it and all those sorts of questions. And so if you've already started, it really makes it difficult for them to influence how and when and where you're going to do things. There are other risks, legal risks associated with it if you start construction. So the short answer to your question is, yes, you can go to construction before you have a financing agreement. No, I would not recommend that you do that.
Thank you, Christopher. This is the last questions in the inbox. Since you're talking about cutoff levels for projects, are we to understand that all small disadvantaged and disadvantaged projects are receiving full grant funding within allowable limits for both planning and construction for this year and next?
So would
Yeah,
you
so
like
this
to
is
tackle that one,
Bridget.
Bridget?
I'll go ahead and chime in on that question. So the amount of grant funding and principal forgiveness that we have this year is about the same as what we have typically been giving out the last few years. So at this time, we do anticipate that we won't have to prioritize projects, that we will be giving them out on a readiness to proceed basis. So that being said, we will continue to look at it based on what applications are being submitted, and that might have to be reevaluated later. But right now, we believe that there should be sufficient funds for who submits.
Thank you, Bridget. So now I'll be passing it along to Jenilyn.
Okay, thank you, Tatiana. And thank you everyone for all of your questions and for your active participation today. We are approaching the close of our meeting, and so we wanted to recap some of our next steps. So as you see on the slide, there is a written comment period currently going on for both the Drinking Water Estate Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan and the Clean Water Estate Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan. Both comment periods close on June 10th, 2020 at 12 noon. So please email your comment letter to commentletters@waterboards.ca.gov using the subject line comment letter June 16, 2020 board meeting. So if your file is greater than 15 megabytes, please fax your comment letter to 916-341-5620. You can also mail your comment letter to us with Janine Townsend as the recipient. More information is on that slide if you wish to mail it. And the second is that both IUPs, intended use plans, will be an agenda item at the June 16th board meeting. Board meetings are now virtual through Zoom. So if you would like to provide any oral comments, please visit waterboards.ca.gov/board_info/remote_meeting for more information. The public comment process is very similar to what we had here today. Next slide, please. And again, if you have any questions, please email the Drinking Water SRF at waterboards.ca.gov for the Drinking Water SRF Intended Use Plan, or email Clean Water SRF at waterboards.ca.gov for anything pertaining to the Clean Water Estate Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan. The fourth thing is that the recording of this video, as well as the PowerPoint presentations, will be available on the Water Board's website within 1 week. So these two things, the presentations and the recording, will be housed on both the Clean Water SRF program webpage and the Drinking Water SRF program webpage. And if you registered with us through Eventbrite for the Zoom meeting, you should have already received a copy of the PowerPoint presentations. The last thing I want to ask you is, we encourage everyone participating in today's Zoom call to tell us your thoughts on today's workshop. An evaluation survey will be sent to the email you use to register through our Eventbrite. And as we transition to this 100% virtual meeting space, we look to your feedback to help us improve all of our virtual meetings moving forward. So I thank you all in advance for your time filling out that evaluation. And if you were forwarded this link and did not register, please email us at either the Drinking Water or Clean Water SRF. So at this point, I invite everyone to look away from their screens for the next 20 seconds. We've been here for quite some time and our eyes need a break. So please look away for 20 seconds while I wrap up the closing remarks. Works best if you look away at least 20 feet away. So while you're doing that, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank all Division of Financial Assistance, Office of Chief Counsel, and Office of Public Participation staff for their work putting this workshop together. I also want to thank all of you at home watching the webcast and those participating in the Zoom meeting for your attention and participation, and your patience with us as we navigate this transition. And I invite everyone to open or to look back at this screen. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, gentlemen.